Julia.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this January 22nd, 2020 work session. Now I'll turn right over to manager and
Thank you, Mayor.
carry on.
So today I'm joined at the table by Frank Lawson, who's the General Manager of Eugene Water and Electric Board. As you know, on January 27th, we put an item on your consent calendar for authorization of issuance of EWEB bonds, and Frank wisely thought it would be helpful for the City Council to understand what those bonds were going to be used for and to understand some of the projects that are happening in our community. So we met yesterday. He quickly brought a team together and kind of ran through his presentation. I think it's really very well done, and I'm excited for him to walk you through that. So thank you, Frank, for being here, and I'll just turn it back over to you.
Thank you, City Manager, Mayor Venus, councilors. Good afternoon. We appreciate your time this afternoon, and I would like to also note that we appreciate the ongoing work that we share with the City of Eugene, city staff on a number of fronts. So I wanted to pass along our thanks for that cooperation. I would like to acknowledge a couple people in the audience. We have two commissioners that I saw before I turned around. Commissioner Mindy Schlossberg is here, and also Commissioner John Brown is here from EWEB. There's also two other important people that I'd like to introduce. Deborah Hart is our Chief Financial Officer, and so all things related to return on investment and finance and bond funding are her area of expertise. And also, I'd like to introduce Karen. So I was like, Karen Kelly, who's our Chief Water Operations and Engineering Manager. So she has everything to do with our water operations. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide some background and context to the upcoming EWEB request for bond authorization. Because there are two of those deal with refinancing existing bonds. The third one is specifically for funding of new projects. That's where we'll concentrate this presentation today, and that's everything to do with the water utility and not the electric utility. Just to quickly note, what we have today is we use about $300 million worth of assets to deliver over 8 billion gallons of clean drinking water that's affordable to the community that we serve. We use a lot of assets to do that. We have 800 miles of pipes. We have 28 different reservoirs and tanks. And we peak in the summer of over 50 million gallons per day. In the winter, it's roughly about a third of that we deliver to the City of Eugene. One of the important things of that is that we employ assets. It's an asset-based. About half of our annual budget is for capital as well as capital financing expenses. So very capital-intense business. We manage those assets with a number of tools. We start with a master plan. That master plan covers a 20-year period. It is mandated by the state of Oregon. That is, it is updated at least every 10 years. The last formal update that we submitted to our regulator, which is the Oregon Health Authority, was in 2015. We also coordinate that with our strategic plan. Our strategic plan is, as you know, very consistent with the City of Eugene relative to the importance of resiliency, emergency preparedness, which also covers the assets that we're talking about, which is the water utility assets. We also then combine those two drivers into a capital improvement plan, and there's a number of very specific projects that come out of that. The capital improvement plan typically covers about 10 years. The near 5 years have much more definition than the outer 5, but we try to capture both the financial impacts as well as the direction the projects are taking. Our present capital improvement plan includes the emergency sites that I know some of you are very familiar with. I know Mayor Venus attended the opening at Howard Elementary, I believe. Our goal was to have 5 sites in 5 years spread around the community. It looks like we'll have 5 sites in about 3 years, so we'll be ahead of schedule on those sites, and then we will continue to look for other possible expansion sites for emergency water. We also recognized, driven by our planning process, that we needed to strengthen our transmission system. And we also have some issues related that I'll go into a little more detail on relative to our base level storage. Base level storage includes College Hill and Hawkins and potentially some other reservoir sites that we are and have planned for, which includes East 40th Avenue. One thing to note about those sites in particular is that they serve water to the entire community. So if you consider the base level reservoirs, including Hayden Bridge and the three sites that we're talking about, all of the water that we serve into the community runs through those sites. This is not to serve a particular neighborhood or higher elevation, which tends to be some other sites. One of the aspects of our prioritization is that we look throughout the system and we develop priorities based on impact and do a number of different risk-based analysis. We often refer to the resilient spine. This is both a term we use on the water and the electric side as a means to just looking at where we see the highest priorities relative to the impact of our investments. This map here, we're probably about right there. We have Hayden Bridge, our main source of water, and then we have transmission lines that feed into various areas within the community. The base level reservoirs are Hawkins exists today, College Hill exists today, and then down here is basically a greenfield site that we've owned for a number of decades. It's at East 40th Avenue in the South Hills. Those three all need to be at basically the same elevation, which is why those sites were originally chosen a number of years ago. In the analysis from the Oregon Health Authority, part of our master plan, there were a number of issues related to both our transmission between those facilities and also the storage itself. One of them is these are simply aging infrastructure. College Hill was built in 1939, Hawkins, I believe, in 1961. They also were not built to present seismic standards. They hold millions of gallons of water and would not survive an earthquake. So they need to be seismically upgraded. There are also issues based on their size and how they operate relative to some potential issues with water quality. We are looking to actually replace some of these reservoirs with a series of slightly smaller reservoirs. The purpose there is that you can deploy or not different reservoirs depending on your volume. Our volume in the summer is roughly 3 times what it is in the winter. And if you had too much storage, you end up with a situation called stale water or old water. So we want to have more operational flexibility in our base level reservoir system. The other one is, as part of our regulatory review, it was deemed by our health authority that College Hill needs to be either replaced or decommissioned by the end of 2023. And so while we have some timelines on other things relative to the staging or the sequence and how we replace that or how we decommission that, that is a regulatory timeline that we are under. As we started this process, looking at the resilient spine about 10 years ago, we started at Hayden Bridge. Over the last 10 years, we've invested about $30 million in upgrading Hayden Bridge seismically, operationally, and resiliency-wise. We've added a number of additional components relative to how we manufacture and acquire chlorine, for example, and how we do backup emergency power at the site. As we have progressed through the system, we are now moving into town, and so we recognize that much of this work can occur in neighborhoods, and so the outreach and the public involvement becomes incredibly important to us relative to the purpose of these projects, the timing of these projects. So we've have a number of principles around communications to the community. We want to make sure that there are no surprises. We want to provide the appropriate opportunities for the public to provide input on things like aesthetics, green spaces, and other aspects of these infrastructure pieces which reside in neighborhoods. And so there'll be opportunities, and we're just beginning to plan that outreach now. You're one of the first informants of some of these plans. but we want this to be a robust process. We want to coordinate significantly, especially on transmission lines, with the city staff and City of Eugene, so that we minimize any impact on traffic, on streets, on other infrastructure that we know that the city is interested in. And so there's a lot of outreach and there's a lot of communications, but these are really important projects for water quality, for water delivery, which is really essential for the health and welfare of our community. To touch a little bit on the financial impacts, one of the things that is really incredible is that the Northwest is blessed with some of the best drinking water in the country and some of the most affordable drinking water in the country. And even when you compare us with some of the most affordable utilities in the country on the water, specifically on water, we are one of the lowest priced water utilities in the Northwest, second from the lowest, Medford being the lowest, and a regional water supplier. We've also done a significant amount of work recognizing that this is not our money, it's our customers' money. And so if you look in particular at the last 5 or 6 years, through money management, through looking at attacking overheads, and really putting our investments where we think and they make the most impact. On the electric side and the water side, we have controlled rates to in essence, 0 on 5 of the last 6 years on the electric side, and forecasting another couple years at that level. And so we've done a significant amount of work looking to prioritize our projects. We are still investing in our system. This was never about being cheap. It was about making the appropriate investments to continue to supply the vital services that we do to the community. On the lower part there, one of the things you'll notice is that we do track what we call utility burden. This is just a recognition that we serve a community that sometimes has some challenges with income, and it's unfair to compare Eugene with Seattle, for example. A few years ago, the price of your water and electric bill combined was about 4.25% of the median household income in Eugene. We have lowered that down to about 3.7 at this point. So we've made inroads in that by really staving off some of the economic and inflationary pressures that we see in construction projects and other overhead and things like Bonneville, who also pass costs to us. And so we think it's important to recognize our community and recognize the importance of managing their money wisely. One of the things that is not uncommon, especially for the water utility, if you look at the history of how we finance projects, it's important to recognize that bonding is an important part of that process. There's a couple of reasons that it makes a lot of sense for the water utility, given the amount of assets we use to deliver our services. One of them is that because most of this infrastructure lasts for decades, when you can finance it through bonds, those who benefit from the asset are then the ones paying throughout the life of the asset, as opposed to financing it with cash, which would artificially and burden today's customers with an asset that would be used by future customers. And so it does make sense in a heavy asset industry that you would use bond funding when possible to do that. Through the years, you'll notice it's about every 3 to 5 years. We approach the city for specifically this type of request. The last one was in 2016. This one is in 2020. The reason the timing is important for us at this point is that we do have projects laid out, but also the bond markets are incredibly attractive right now. I don't know of any better time to actually borrow if you have the financial headroom to do it. First of all, you can't be fully leveraged, so you have to have a good debt service ratio. But also, you have to have the projects that are in place that could commence in the statutory requirement timelines for getting that type of funding. So we feel like this is the most affordable time to pursue this type of financing with the least amount of rate impact for our customers. One of the things you will notice is there's some general themes across there. We are looking, we have worked at Hayden Bridge. We're looking to move into various transmission projects. We've done a number of pumping and controls updates, metering, and also you'll see the base level reservoirs, which really will last. These are projects that last anywhere from a series of projects that will range over a decade to maybe as long as 15 years into the future. Just to kind of to close the presentation, one of the things that we recognize in the services that we provide is there's a series of principles that we uphold independent of water or electric or of capital or O&M. Security is really important for these sites. Security both from a cyber perspective, a physical perspective. Water systems can be threatened if you don't protect them. So we want to make sure that they're properly secure. We want to make sure that they are resilient. We do have requirements over the next 50 years to mitigate for potential seismic issues in our infrastructure. That was part of a state mandate, and it's also part of our strategic plan. We know that we supply vital products and services, and we need to be able to do that under a variety of circumstances. Some of them we can predict, some of them we can't, but we need to be designing our systems and our people and our finances to be the most resilient possible. Water quality and reliability year after year after year is the number one thing our customers tell us is the most important to them. We also, it's actually more important than electricity, although I don't like the electric utility hear that, but time after time after time, it is water quality and water reliability. That's the number one thing that we are concerned with, and we make decisions based on that. We also balance that with the recognition we have to be affordable. We cannot just blindly spend our customers' money. We need to do this in a way that's prudent. And then finally, we need to make sure we're distributing those costs and those projects in an equitable way. We cannot artificially burden one part of our community or another. We recognize green space, environmental issues. These are all important to our community. And so we have to balance our spending and capital and infrastructure and all of those types of programs and costs with equity in mind. And so with that, I would just turn it back to the city manager or whoever else takes over at this point.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. And so I have Alan and Betty in the queue. Anybody else? All right, take it away, Alan.
Thanks, Frank. Very thorough and good presentation. My former job, I used to travel all over the West and go to cities every place, and would stay and always drink tap water. And I got to tell you, the UWEB's water is the best water in the West. There are some really crappy water tasting systems, and that is just surprising to me. And the Mackenzie water and the water that UWEB provides just tastes so good compared to every place else in the West Coast. You mentioned the College Hill needs to be replaced for water quality reasons, health reasons. Is that the same for the Hawkins Reservoir, or is that a different reason?
That is not the same for the Hawkins. Hawkins is basically based on seismic standards.
Both need seismic.
The other reason to look at this as 3 sites and not 1 is the water system works together. So there's balancing of pressures that occur between Hawkins, College Hill, and the new site at East 40th. It doesn't mean that all the reservoirs have to be done at the same time or in the same order. You can do one before the other. The only time frame we have is relative to the issues such as a leaky roof and other things at College Hill. But the others are seismic, they're old, and they need to be operationally balanced. The other thing we're trying to do is, for example, at College Hill, which is a 20 million gallon reservoir with a wall down the middle, we're actually looking to put 2 7.5 million gallon reservoirs so we can operate those in a much more flexible way.
And those will be replaced in place?
Yeah, there's one will be on the north edge of the property, and then one would be built next to it in sort of the middle part of the property. That will allow us to make the rest of the area around there green space and parkland, and we'll work with the community around landscaping and other things.
I just walked the 40th this summer from some friends of ours, a friends of ours abut that, and they've enjoyed that for a long time, but it's time that they've known it's going to happen someday. So that seems like a really good spot. The timeline for projects, we've heard a lot about and talked a lot about, and kind of stopped and started on the second source, the largest utility west of the Mississippi, city that doesn't have a second source of water. Can you address that? And what's the status of that plan? And the original plan was to get off the Willamette.
Right. So the present approach there is to look at kind of a bracketed approach. One is part of the emergency sites is to deal with short-term issues. That's why we're doing those in neighborhoods. The other piece of it is that the board has directed me and Springfield Utility Board has directed their general manager to work together on a plan that we could potentially team up and do a regional approach to a second source, which would spread the cost between the communities, allow us both to exercise our water rights, and eventually give more flexibility within the region. At some point, if you need a second source, it's not going to matter which side of the river you live on. The threats can be similar, and so I owe the EWEB board an updated report by the end of this March, and so we are having discussions with Springfield about what the best approach to that would be. We do have in our long-term financial plan some money, those outer potential bond funding amounts. Some of that was for a potential second source financing.
Right, noticed that. Well, you have been working together. That's
Cats living with dogs. I don't know.
yeah, things are just going crazy. Who'd know? The 89 million gallons of water that you have in storage, how many days of water is that? So if we have a big event, and how many days does the system have in it? Not that it can get to your house because of the system in between. Maybe you can address that issue too.
So just based on storage in the summer, it would be a little under 2 days if we were at full capacity. In the winter, it would be approximately 6 days to a week. However, under those circumstances, there would be some pretty heavy curtailment. We would be down to just water for basically living purposes, and so it would last longer than that. But that is a concern. Right now, none of them meet the seismic standards, so we would, in essence, have very little water storage, none at the base level, which is even more of a concern. But it would be on the order of days is how I would classify it, and then we'd extend that as long as possible just through what advice we give for consumption.
Thus the need for the 5 sites in the 3 years, like Howard Elementary, to do the wells with solar power to
Right.
So they're off-grid. They can be off-grid.
Yeah, those are intended for the difference between sort of emergency water and alternative water. Alternative water being a second source that you could utilize for a longer period of time, and that could be deployed relatively quickly. The neighborhood sites are one because depending on the circumstances, you may or may not know the status of your distribution system and your storage. And most people know where their local school is. We have signs that we've worked with the city on, similar to the tsunami signs you see at the coast, only telling you where to run away to. This tells you where to go to for emergency water sources. And so there's 2 different approaches there around resiliency. One is short-term and one would be long-term.
And maybe you can tell the folks that are listening on and watching the amount of water they're supposed to have per person for emergencies per day.
Yeah, it's really a gallon per person per day, and we're looking at a couple weeks worth. I believe the last number I heard was you should plan for 2 or 3 weeks.
So if you had 2 weeks, 2 people, that's 14 gallons of water that you need stored on site.
Yeah.
Probably not in your.
That's advanced math. Just you know, yeah, that's appropriate.
You should have 40. 2 people, 2 weeks is 40.
Yeah, right. So, right.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you. Oh, and the quality and reliability, is that a thumbs up, or is that when you hit your hammer with a thumb?
So quality and reliability, as you pointed out, the quality of our water is excellent. The reliability is excellent when you look at other utilities across the West and across the nation. We recognize, though, the importance of continuing to invest in the system. And I think part of what we deal with is you don't always get appreciated for the services you provide until you take them away, or they are taken away for some period of time. And just example, last winter when we had a winter storm, it was pretty obvious the importance of the electric system. And so both of those are excellent. Our intent is that it's a benefit to the community, and we want to keep it that way.
Yeah, my last question was about quality, and last summer Salem had an outbreak,
Yes.
algae outbreak which forced people to not drink the water. And what's the likelihood of that happening now? And I know you guys have your own labs, so you can take care of all that stuff
Right.
internally to the utility. Most utilities don't have that.
That's a great question. So there's two things that have happened. One is we did last summer detect cyanotoxins in the McKenzie River for the first time. They were detected at our intake. However, we have a lot more robust treatment process than Salem has, and so we were able to treat for that, and nothing made it into the finished water. We also monitor our watershed pretty closely, and we work with the two or three reservoirs in our watershed as to how and when they release water, which is also an important aspect to that. But the bottom line is our treatment process is a lot more robust. We can treat for it, but it is of a concern, particularly around cyanotoxins, the impacts of climate change and other things on the water quality. By the way, this number is staggering to me. We do 85,000 water samples a year throughout the system, from the watershed to our treatment processes to our distribution system. That's an incredible number. We do a lot in our own lab, and we are actually in process of building a new lab over the next year or so.
Yeah, and the water quality issue for College Hill is that's finished water, cleaned water. So
Right.
once it gets up there, if it gets leaked or people do something, put bad things into that, it gets down right to your tap.
That's correct.
That's the problem, right? Okay, just clarifying. Thanks.
Betty?
Thank you. Ellen, did you forget about water for dogs? You ask how much you need per person,
Consider my dog a person.
then you have 3 people. Okay.
Just gonna say, is your wife gonna go with it?
My questions, the 40th Avenue site, what is there now and what's going to be there?
So there is basically nothing there now.
I thought it looks like a
it's
park.
Yeah, it's basically some trees and grass. It's really undeveloped space. Like I said, UWeb's owned it for decades. What it will look like is there will be a couple of round tanks there. They will be partially showing, the intent is to keep the tree line on the south end. That's the end that you would see if you're in the hills to the south. But it would look like a couple of large round storage tanks. We have similar other tanks throughout the community, only these would be a little larger and they would be partially buried.
And it would still be open space that people could use in a way.
The intent at all the sites, including that one, there is certain infrastructure that we do have to contain and fence. However, these sites are large enough that there will continue to be a lot of green space around it, and we would intend to work with neighbors and other members of the community as to whether there's other amenities like trails or walking and open space. But there would be open space at all of these sites.
Good. I think you mentioned bad water. Does the water that I have in those big jugs, does that need to be changed?
It should be changed periodically. The other option is to have your own form of disinfection. I think that's appropriate even with these emergency sites. Typically, you can take, and Karen will correct me if I'm wrong, it's really half a teaspoon per gallon of liquid bleach will do it? 1/8 of a teaspoon? Okay, so a very little amount of liquid bleach in that will actually clean that up and disinfect it. But the other option is to routinely change it out. Yeah.
Except I can't lift the thing. But then you mentioned affordability, and my sisters in Illinois pay less for water than I do, but I won't drink the water when I'm there. I have to drink a lot of other stuff when I'm visiting them. But I guess you just said it's the cheapest in the Northwest.
Yeah, I think when you look, even across the country, we are one of the most affordable drinking water utilities in the country. I don't know in Illinois what that would be like. The comparators that we use around the Northwest, we are second lowest. The reason Medford is lowest is they are regional, almost a wholesale water supplier for the Rogue Valley.
And do you need to, somewhere I heard that I should leave the water running for a couple of minutes before drinking it. Is that because of the pipes in many houses or what?
That advice would probably have come if you have a pre-1985 house where there is the potential to have lead fixtures or lead connectors. We don't have any lead in our system, but some older homes potentially would, and that would be a good practice if you haven't used your water for some period of time in those situations. That's probably where that advice came from.
Does that cost a lot of money?
No, it doesn't cost. In fact,
2 minutes, does that cost a lot?
if you equate this, if you did the math, and we actually, the cost of water, you can get 10,000 pounds of water for about $5 delivered. And not even Amazon, to my knowledge, can do that, at least not yet. Now, maybe there's a future, but I don't know where else you can get 10,000 pounds of anything for $5. And so just for comparison.
I had a huge bill a few years ago, over $100 for water. And I called AWeb and I was told that maybe a neighbor had filled a swimming pool from my, but anyway, I got a new meter after that. But you mentioned aesthetics too. The place on Potter Street near 36th. A few years ago, it was rehabbed and some nice plants put in, and then nobody watered them and everything. It's not too attractive now.
We'll
So is the
look into
water
that
company
site.
short of water?
No, we're not short of water, and I just mentioned how cheap it is. I don't know the particular situation, but we can look into that site. We do have, to the last of my knowledge, about 250 different sites throughout the community that we have assets and maintain and monitor, and that's one that we can look into and make sure it's appropriate.
Yeah, it was Roger Gray had some really nice plants put in, and then they watered them the first year, and then after that, it doesn't look very good anymore. So we better hope that there's an earthquake, it happens in the summertime when it's raining, I guess.
I would prefer it doesn't happen at all, but we do need to prepare our system. Part of it's for the earthquake, but we have an endless number of threats, from chemical spills to cyber attacks to threats to the Northwest grid to, I mean, I could go down the list. We need to make sure that our system is resilient as possible. Our community is prepared. It's why we've worked with the city and others on the Pledge to Prepare campaign. There's also an individual component to it. So while we hope it's not there, we need to prepare for it anyway.
Well, I'm glad you're looking at places to get water near where people live. Thank you.
Okay, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Frank, I'm so glad you're here. I so appreciate you making that presentation. That was very informative. I'm appreciative of the fact that you got 2 board members here, 2 commissioners in the back of the room. I wish all of them were here, and I wish all of us could sit at this table and have a conversation. They weren't probably, given a heads up that they might get asked a question or two. So I'm not going to do that right now, but I'd really like to. We're talking about this today because what was on our consent calendar got pulled off for further discussion, and what should have been an easy thing to just run through and approve ended up in need of further conversation. If, good Lord forbid, we had that earthquake or, some event occurred where people were short of water or whatever, they'd probably blame all of us at this table as much as they talked about eWeb, because to the people in our community, I don't think they see a lot of difference between what's the province of eWeb and what's the province of the city when it comes to serving them. So my question is, what can we do as a city to make our mutual plans of things we have to do in the next few years work better together because EWEB has important things they need to get done to serve people, but so do we. And I don't want us to negotiate in any way that we forget that we all serve the same folks. And I'm hopeful that maybe there's a better way to work together. So I wonder, what would your commissioners suggest the city might do to make that easier on you guys?
So I think there's both the general aspect of working together, and then there's also some of the very specifics that you mentioned around resiliency. On a number of fronts, I think we work well at a staff level. There's a lot of interaction that takes place. There's challenges to that from time to time relative to commitments of boards and councils, and I think that going forward, understanding what those interests are. I know that City Manager Maderi and I are presently looking at a number of things that we're trying to package up for both the council and for the board to be able to make some logical decisions around.
Right.
I think over time, when you blend too many subjects together, the realities get fuzzy and the interests get fuzzy. And so we're trying to wade through that as much as possible on a number of fronts. One of the more exciting aspects that we're looking at and doing a lot of work with the city as well as the county and other agencies is around emergency preparedness and getting ready for significant events like an earthquake is just one example. There are a number of issues with that, and to a certain extent there has to be a divide and conquer in the sense that we all have fuel interests, for example. Water is different, there's electricity, there's different sites for evacuation, there's the process around the incident command system. So each agency has a role in that, and we're coordinating that more and more and more. The other thing that we're looking at very specifically is how do we coordinate on issues such as potential fires. I know that fires are a big deal in California. They've just asked PG&E if you want to know if it's a big deal or not. We have in some ways an urban forest, and we need to prepare for those kinds of events as well. I think with Matt and some of the other work we're doing, it just opens up more and more doors to work together around really a lot of capital projects, but also a lot of coordination around looking at specific issues and events such as drills and getting ready for and preparing for in some ways the emergency unknown. But I think our staff works well with city staff.
I agree with you. You just mentioned over grouping things together. Do you think there's a point of diminishing return to group issues together when you're negotiating ones where there may be separate interests involved with our organizations?
I think there can be times with that. In many cases, if you have some reason to group those together, which they could have a very similar subject matter, or there's a lot of interaction between similar elements, I think it's probably appropriate. I think trying to bundle too many different things, for example, if you were to bundle a water issue with simply a property issue, that becomes a difficult thing to reconcile. But I know in working with the city manager, we're looking at a lot of issues specifically right now around property and property management, and I think there's some opportunities to clarify that both for the council and for EWEB.
For my clarification, do you happen to remember who proposed the idea of bundling these things together? Was that you or John? Do you remember?
I don't recall specifically. It was a conversation over breakfast, I think, at one point. But I don't remember who actually initiated that. I do think that's an area where there is some opportunity to look at this as a more holistic issue, not necessarily a bundled issue, but there's some holistic issues that are shared across particular parcels of property or issues with property independent of the actual specifics around that property. But
like I said up front, I think that as time goes on, we're going to have more issues. Several of the things you just mentioned in terms of resiliency involve larger community questions, and we're going to need to work together better. So I don't have a good suggestion. That's why I asked you. But I hope that as we go on, our boards can have some opportunities for more more close interaction where we might have more informal conversations and formal public ones too, where we can share maybe the importance of our shared goals a little more closely and more smoothly than we have so far, maybe.
I think there's an opportunity there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah, I've got a couple, three questions. So, what is the current status of you guys handling the issues that come about with people putting waste into the river, and how is that affecting the system specifically? Are we seeing more of that or less of that? And you've got the apparatus and the equipment to handle that.
So it's a great question. When we look at delivering safe drinking water, it starts with the watershed. Our watershed is the McKenzie watershed. We have developed a number of partnerships up the McKenzie Valley. We do a lot of monitoring. We have an emergency response coordinated effort between agencies and other people who have a presence up the river, so we can respond to a spill, for example. It is pretty well known that protecting your watershed is actually less expensive than rebuilding your watershed. We are blessed with a beautiful watershed in the McKenzie River. Just its whole geology is pretty unique. Other than some of the other issues, it's also one of the top interests of our customers is what are we doing to protect that? We're dealing with farmers, we're dealing with other issues upriver, we're dealing with dumping. Now that said, we are not the enforcement agent, but we are really looking at trying to do things that are more preventative up the river. And so we have a lot of partnerships and invest a pretty significant amount in that.
So who is the enforcement agent?
Would be the Oregon DEQ.
Okay. Second question, I'm going to say this was about maybe 20 years ago or so that eWeb had established a customer assistance program as far as, bills were concerned and that kind of thing. Does that still exist? And what are you doing? What other measures are you taking to make sure that costs are held down for people who are basically poor and do not have the resources to keep pace with their bills?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So we do have that program still. It's called the Customer Care Program, and there's an income qualification for that program. We use a similar one that the federal government uses for LIHEAP as well as Bonneville uses. That is what I would call response oriented. We also have an education program specifically where we'll do home energy audits, for example, for limited income people. We have increased incentives for renters or limited income people who can work with landlords, or if they're a property owner themselves, they actually get a larger incentive because of their income qualification. And in general with that, it was a few years ago that we had significant overhead in that particular group within the utility and how it was distributed using some outside agencies. We felt like the best thing was that money needed to go to those who really needed it. And so since that time, we've cut that overhead by about a third or to a third of what it was. And so we do that. It's about $1 million a year roughly that we distribute to that particular resource. But also we recognize keeping rates down for everybody is a good thing as well. So.
And how much do you work with the city in terms of the city's initiatives around, these kinds of issues?
So there's 2 or 3 areas that we're working with and in some areas looking to expand. One of them I mentioned earlier, emergency preparedness, I think is a big one. The other one is issues related to the climate and the impacts of the climate and climate change through the Climate Action Plan and other things that we're doing. We recognize we have a pretty big impact on that. as well as the city does. And the third one is we're having some explorations around what it might look like to increase the opportunities working with the city around a pilot program to look specifically at limited income and rental properties in a particular neighborhood. And so the city manager and I are trying to figure out where and how that might get launched. So a number of fronts working with the city.
And my last question is this, and I know this is a touchy subject, but can you give us a status or an update on what's happening with smart meters?
So roughly about, we have about 40,000 smart meters installed presently. In total, our metering would require 150,000 in total. Our goal has been to deploy most of those by the end of 2021 on the electric side and a couple years after that on the water side. It's an important technology when we look at our future resource selections and being able to select the resources with the lowest carbon impact. One of the things that does occur is that when you use your electricity has a significant amount of impact on the carbon intensity of it. And so it's important with that. But we're about a third of the way into it, looking to plan and finish that up between end of 2021 and end of 2023.
And to follow up on that, there's been various people who have written emails to me, and I think other counselors as well, about, the health effects of that technology. Do you have any updated information about what those effects are, and if you have a plan to mitigate those effects?
So our approach to that is to recognize that we are not the agency that determines the health effect of a particular smart meter. There's the American Cancer Society, there's the FCC, there's a number of other agencies, including the Oregon Health Authority, which we consulted originally on it, and they have determined that they're safe. And so we're relying on the agencies who have expertise and have the appropriate resources to really look at that. There are ways to mitigate it. We do offer the ability to opt out of that particular program. We also recognize that when you just look at the technology and the amount of exposure that those meters have, a full deployment throughout Eugene for our smart meters, which would be 150,000 meters, would be the rough equivalent of adding 13 to 15 cell phones to the city. That doesn't sound very substantial from a frequency footprint to me.
Anybody else who hasn't asked? So,
Cell phones.
cell phones, wow. Thank you. This was very, very informative. I appreciate it. A couple of things I'm really appreciative of the emergency preparedness work. And the sites at the schools, I think, are really, really encouraging and hopeful, and it scares us all, I think, the idea that people wouldn't have water in a crisis. So thank you for that work. And just a kind of reminder also to my colleagues on the council that council leadership and the city manager and the eWeb board leadership and the general manager are meeting on a quarterly basis to talk about issues in common. So we did just have a meeting a couple of weeks ago talking about climate action plan and about low-income housing. And so that is an avenue for those of you on council, if there's a particular issue you want to bring to the table in those conversations, that you can talk to council leadership or to me. So, thank you.
I would like to thank the city also. Our latest two sites, one is at the Science Center near Autzen Stadium, and the other is at the Sheldon Community Center site. We just drilled the well there while the kids were out for vacation, and so those are in partnership with the city, not necessarily schools directly, but in partnership with the city. So thank you.
It's really great. So thank you very, very much. It was helpful. Yes, one more comment?
One other question. Is there a price differential in terms of having a standard meter versus having, the smart meter?
There is not one today. what our plan is there, eventually, when we get more of a full deployment, we will look to see if there are significant cost differences, and it would be fair for those that have a greater or lesser cost to pay that cost difference. So the plan is that at some point, it is likely that the cost of a meter reader will be higher, and therefore, if you opt out, there would be some additional surcharge. There's not one today.
Okay, thank you very, very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, we are now making a transition to return to wrap up our discussion on the process session.
I think Beth is just going to lead us through this. And as you know, Beth is joined by Brooke Freed, our new CMO Division Manager.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Councilors. As the Mayor said, we're here today to wrap up the 2 process sessions you held last week. We wanted to take this opportunity to summarize the actions you took related to the public forum and then look for formal approval of the remaining proposed changes to your operating agreements. During your discussion about potential public forum improvements, Council gave staff direction on 3 changes to pilot over the next 6 months. The first change was to adjust public forum testimony to 2 minutes per speaker. The second motion that passed was to limit the total time for public forum to 90 minutes. And your final decision related to public forum changes was to pilot a new system of randomizing the speaker order so it is not first in line, first to testify. This change was proposed as a way to address equity concerns around participation. Staff will begin working to implement an automated randomization system, and in the meantime, we will devise a lower-tech way to shuffle the names for the presiding officer. In addition to these changes, Council agreed to schedule committee reports and items of interest and non-land use consent calendar items before public forum, and to schedule a second consent calendar consisting of annexation requests and other land use items after public forum. Staff is prepared to implement all these changes beginning with your next meeting on January 27th, unless we receive other direction. And as we work to put these changes quickly into motion, we are also developing and implementing a communication plan. Formal communication of these changes will include a press release, social media updates, web page announcements, and a handout to be distributed at the meeting. The mayor's script is being revised to announce the changes and to encourage constructive feedback, which could inform council's decision to make the changes permanent. Informally, we pledge to do as much outreach in person and on the phones as we are able. Last week, we also proposed several changes to your operating agreements to bring them into alignment with your current practices. The motions that are in front of you enumerate the proposed changes, which I'll quickly go over once more for you. Section 1.02 work sessions was updated to reflect the current practice of conducting noon work sessions on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Wednesdays of the month, and scheduling any additional work sessions needed at 5:30 p.m. on the 3rd Mondays of the month. A new Section 306 action items was added to clarify that, in general, action on ordinances and councilor-introduced resolutions will be placed on regular city council meeting agendas and will be scheduled after the public forum. This does not preclude a councilor's ability to request action to occur at other times. Section 7.02 was updated to clarify that whenever possible or practicable, at least 24 hours notice is provided for all intended motions. Section 10.03 local expenses was updated to reflect the current rate for bicycle mileage reimbursement of 26 cents per mile. Section 10.04 spouse guest expenses was updated to replace all references to spouse with the word partner. And there was one proposed change to Section 1.05 public forum to reflect the presiding official's prerogative to reduce testimony time when the number of speakers warrants such a reduction. That was removed from this set of updates and may be reevaluated after the 6-month pilot period for 2-minute rounds. And we're here to answer any questions. And
Okay, comments? Emily, go for it.
Thank you. Number 1, is it the 5th Wednesday is also as needed, or just the Monday one? Because if it's just the Monday one, we need to put a period after month and a capital A for additional.
We do currently schedule, we have, as far as I can remember, scheduled fifth Mondays. So the addition really, that's to clarify, and then the addition is really the third Monday at 5:30 as needed. So it is two different, the fifth Wednesday, yes, yeah. We've been doing the fifth Wednesday. The third Monday is a relatively new process.
So Counselor Semple, what I think you're saying is that there should be and fifth Wednesday of the month, period, additional 5:30 work sessions would be scheduled on third Monday of the month as needed.
But if the fifth Monday is as needed, then it either needs to be in that sentence or somehow clear that they're both as needed.
Punctuation matters.
It does, always.
So if they're both as needed, it needs to be stated that way.
Is the intent to revise it as both as needed?
The intent was to reflect the practice that I've been, when I create the calendar for the year, I always schedule the fifth Wednesday,
So if we were to reflect current practice, then it would be period capital additional.
yes,
And what,
And that would only apply to Monday.
correct.
yes.
So always Wednesday, maybe Monday.
Yes. And what you'll be doing today, where even though it says move to update, it's still a move to direct the city manager to return with a resolution that updates. You still will need to take formal action adopting these as part of your operating agreement.
Number 4, can we add walking to bicycles so it's official?
It's a vehicle.
Walking, you can get reimbursed for walking.
Well, I'll just bring my bicycle every time I walk, if that's the way it is. Shoes wear out just like tires.
You certainly, these are your motions. You can make the motions. And
Well, I would like it to include and walking so it's clear.
okay. I wasn't the one that had these discussions or wrote the motion, so I'm going to defer to Beth
That
on
would,
this.
yes, as Catherine said, that you can make that motion. I was just updating what was already in your operating agreement, so.
Well, I'm going to put in for my mileage that I walk with my bike then.
I think what we're saying is that when we get to that motion, you can amend the motion to include and walking.
Absolutely, 100%.
Well, that was the question, so I could do that later. Can we keep the timer going after we get to the 3 seconds past? Does it work? Will it keep counting?
I'm sorry.
When we run out of 3 minutes, it then goes to 1, 2, 3 of how much we're
Negative time.
over time, but it stops at 3. Can it keep going? So if somebody talks over 45 seconds, we know that.
Sure, absolutely, if the council agrees.
Can it do that?
Keep flashing the whole thing.
It'll
You bet.
just keep counting down.
Oh, how many seconds after it goes to 0?
That'd probably be quite informative.
So it might reduce our meeting time. Or at least have a lot more second rounds.
Okay. Mike, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I do.
Are you done?
You'll never see a negative time on mine. I take every opportunity to speak that I can. I just never try to go too long.
I know that.
Is there anything in the statute about council reimbursement or expenses or this in the charter, the city's ability to do so? I think that's what, forgive me, I don't want to speak for my colleague, but I think what she's wondering is, where's the line with what can be what kind of expense can be reimbursed here?
I'm not aware of anything statutory, but I also don't know the genesis of reimbursing for bicycle mileage, perhaps.
I
Yeah.
could look into that, but
So I
would
don't,
assume that's to encourage people to bike
I would
rather
ass-
than drive.
yes, I
You
would,
don't know who came up with that?
I don't.
Paul Nicholson.
It's a
Long time
conflict
ago.
of interest, isn't it?
I think so. I wasn't on the council then, but
That's
that's what I
fine.
understand that he did.
Have we always done that?
If it was started with Paul Nicholson, then,
Yeah.
Not always.
yeah. So starting then, it's been in here, as I understand it, Beth, correct me, for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
I updated it, the rate
that-
from
that
2000.
makes-
The language doesn't say
That
anything
makes
about
sense,
walking
riding
at the
your
moment.
bike, you're wearing out the tires. I think it makes
Shoes
sense.
are spendy these days. What, does it say anything about walking at all?
No,
I'm double checking it, but I don't believe it does. I think that It's just bicycle.
Maybe you just want to say alternative transportation.
I'm endeavoring to
Scooter, it
seek
could be any
legislative
numbers
intent
of
here.
things.
That's what I'm doing.
Yes, and I apologize, I don't have that for you. It does read currently, the reimbursement for bicycle mileage as permitted by Resolution 4375 shall be 15.1 per mile as of September 1, 2002, and shall be adjusted each year at the same rate of increase as that of automobile reimbursement. Such materials such as books and directories may also be
here.
eligible for reimbursement.
By the way,
Greg's doing
02, you were here.
Didn't start in '02.
I don't know if it started in '02. I believe that was just the last time it's actually been
Sorry.
It
updated.
didn't start then. I know it started way before that.
Sorry, apologize.
I read about it in the newspaper, and it made sense because the argument was that you ride your bike, you're wearing out the parts. You're wearing out the tires and the gears and everything the more you use it. And it was, as I remember reading, I think it was Paul who suggested it and had made the arguments, and the council passed it, and there was an article in the Register Guard, but it was way before '02.
That's very good. My reason for asking it was to seek legislative intent, but it was also to understand the implications of any change we might make right now to that language. And so is there anything in there that if it said alternative methods of walking or biking would create an issue you can imagine?
No. I mean, if you wanted to, right, and that would get at, if you wanted to just change it to alternative modes of transportation, that could cover walking, scootering.
Like I was just going to say,
bicycle.
if I got an electric scooter, this is going to be a lot of fun. It's like 4 miles from my house, so that'll be a hoot. And, excellent.
Yes.
I think we should charge you if you get an electric scooter.
No, I think you should stay out of the way if I get an electric scooter, but,
Okay.
I do.
all right, thank
All
you,
right,
Mayor.
So we can, we'll go do these motions one by one, and so when we get to that one,
I thought you were
Emily-
bringing it back, and then we were voting.
The one.
I thought you were bringing it back, and then we were voting.
Yeah, take your direction today and bring back a resolution.
oh, so we're not going to vote on these, any of
No,
these.
you're going to vote on the individual motions, so we know
Right,
what to put in the
exactly.
resolution, and then you'll vote on the final resolution later.
Voting on whether to vote?
Yeah, we're going to
Voting on what to
gotta
add into
approve
what you're
these
going to vote on.
motions so they get added in. So when we get to that one, you can add your
Yeah.
language. Okay, so can I have a motion?
Move to update Section 1.02 work sessions to reflect that work sessions will be scheduled on the second, third, fourth, and fifth Wednesdays of the month,
Period.
period, capital A. Additional 5:30 work sessions will be scheduled on the third Monday of the month as needed.
Second.
All in
I'm
favor?
still confused about
Oh,
this
wait,
needed
you need
part.
clarification
Yeah, a
before
bunch
we
of
vote?
people do.
Okay, all right.
I'm,
That was voting.
I thought that was voting.
I thought we were voting.
Are we voting or are we?
Well, we
you have-
moved
you
the
need-
motion,
you
then
need
we can talk
clarification. Yes,
again.
I know, I just thought
Chair
we
does.
understood it, but if you need a moment to get more clarification, please do.
I'm still confused about which, are they both needed, or is only the Mondays needed?
Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mike, a comment?
Chair determines needed or city manager determines needed?
Well, we do an
it
agenda
would be in the-
meeting
our agenda
together and
setting,
we go over what's,
I apologize. I know the process. What I'm saying is, if there were a disagreement between the two of you about whether or not a Monday night meeting was needed, who would decide there was going to be one?
That would never happen with a smart city manager.
I know that.
Right.
I know that. That's really true. But I'm trying to ask the, ridiculous question because I want to know the answer.
you know, I just don't think that's an issue over which we would really be that far off. I think it's not that controversial.
I honestly don't know who has absolute, if there were a disagreement, who gets to decide?
Mayor has control of the agenda.
That's what I thought too,
Yeah.
but I
But,
Just wanted to hear somebody say it.
yeah, I mean, it's an important collaboration to get that agenda down in a
think
way
it
that
matters
works,
for-
so.
I just don't remember the
answer to your
specifics of the
question is
language.
If the mayor decides we need a third Monday night meeting, then
we
we're going to have one.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
And that's only the conditions if the mayor says we need another meeting here.
Or if I demand one, and then that'll be my last Monday night meeting.
You're
Okay.
darn right, by golly.
Are we
quick.
Did you have a second? You were seconded. Greg, did you have a comment or were you voting before?
I was voting.
Okay, all right. Do you have a comment? or-
Question. Did we formally decide to have the third Monday ever, or did that just happen?
It was organic, really.
We did have a conversation about it a year ago, I
I
think,
remember that, too.
And I don't
because of
I
the,
remember that, but I don't remember ever voting that we wanted to do it.
that's why we're voting now, I think.
We're not voting.
That's why we're voting now, because we never did it formally.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we never did it formally, so. Okay, ready to vote? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, none opposed, so that passes. All right, next one.
Move to add section 3.06 action items to reflect that, in general, action on ordinance and councilor-introduced resolutions will be placed on regular meeting agendas and will be scheduled after the public forum. Parens, note, this motion does not preclude taking action on items during work sessions or other portions of the meeting.
Second.
Any discussion on this, Emily?
Who decides which way it goes, whether it's during a work session or after the forum?
Here.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to vote for this one.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? Oh, Mike?
Out of curiosity, do you mind if I ask why? Because I have some issues around, not with our mayor certainly, but the form of how we've decided this.
Because I've had multiple experiences where waiting until 10 o'clock to talk about a controversial issue before we voted, I think was stressful. People wanted to leave. It was stressful to wait from 5 o'clock through all the meetings to be ready to argue your point. And some things, a resolution we don't usually have to discuss. And sometimes we do those in work sessions. So some things that wouldn't matter
Right.
to me, and some things really would. And I don't get a say in it, and so I'm not going to vote.
As I understand it, this still allows us to raise things at items.
In general.
At the 5:30, correct? All right.
I would also say, now you're in council leadership, so you have an opportunity, any counselor has an opportunity to talk to me about your preferences about timing. That door is open. I don't, so if you have a concern about something happening at a time and you want to suggest an alternative time that would work better for you, I want to hear that.
We also do have, aside from your wonderful willingness to be open to that, we also do, technically speaking, have the right for any counselor who can get the floor to make a motion that we move some item to some time specific in the agenda. And if you got a majority, you got it. That's when we're talking about it. So there's a remedy to all of that.
And we often will know before a public forum night if we're expecting a pretty robust forum, so we'll know if it's running late, and there's an opportunity to talk with counselors saying, do you want to defer this to a less exhausting night? So, I think, all right. Any other comments, questions?
Stop.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, opposed, 1. Okay, that one passes. All right, next one.
Move to update Section 7.02 meeting guidelines to clarify that whenever possible or practical, every effort is made to contact other members of the council to inform them of an intent to make a motion at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting.
Second.
Questions, comments? Betty?
Yeah, what does it mean by every effort? Does it mean you have to call them and leave messages to call again? And
Yeah, I think so.
Purpose.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
I object to say you have to take time to
Can you
make every
just
effort.
email?
What?
Can you just email, or do you have to call
Whatever.
If it would email, it says every effort, that's what I'm asking. Is it sufficient to just send an email at 5 a.m. if you want to? And
That's exactly what we're supposed to prevent.
That's what we're trying to.
Sending an email at 5 a.m. the day before the meeting is
Yeah.
inappropriate. This is
Well,
supposed to,
you can't say you can't do it, though.
that's not what this says.
Okay.
This is whenever possible or practicable.
Yeah, the matter, of course,
Right.
is you're supposed to give counselors 24 hours by either calling him or doing something, make sure that they know.
Mike?
I just want to be clear too, yeah, possible means that 24 hours is the idea is the no surprise. It's also the idea that, give people time to think about it. But practical is the reason I'll vote for this, because it may be politically impractical to give notice.
Right.
So I can vote for this the way it's worded and still retain the opportunity to do things I think need to be done, so. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That passes. All right, number 4.
Move to update section 10.03, local expenses to reflect the current bicycle mileage reimbursement rate of $0.26 per mile.
Second.
Okay, you want to speak to that?
Again, I think alternative methods of transportation deserve a reimbursement. I'm sure that part of the reason for doing this was to encourage alternate forms of transportation. And if we don't include the alternative forms, there's a lot of incentive to drive. Even though it's 6 blocks from me, I'll get 50 cents a mile instead of 25 if I drive my car.
Will the maker accept that as a friendly?
Whoever made this up, I moved it. so
You made
I'd
the motion.
accept it.
You put it on the
I
table,
accept it.
So can I just read what I think
Yeah.
I would capture that would do that? It would be a move to update section 10.03, local expenses to reflect that current alternate form, or say, sorry, not
modes.
current, to reflect that alternate forms of transportation, including biking and walking, have
Yeah.
a mileage reimbursement rate of 0.26 a mile.
Yes.
Okay. So now that is the motion. Does the second accept it?
Sure.
Reluctantly, yes.
With great enthusiasm.
Is that a yes or no? I'm sorry.
Is a yes.
All right, Alan.
26 cents come from?
It was,
Is that a federal number or?
it was a number I got from finance staff. It was a formula.
Your current operating agreement requires, right now, it's written to say that the increase as that of the automobile reimbursement, so I'm guessing it's tied to that, because that's what your current operating agreement is.
Yeah, because it doesn't, I would be hard pressed to say that walking costs the same as bicycle. Right?
Shoes are spendy, man.
So part of this, I'm guessing, was at, and I don't know, because I wasn't around when it was originally put in, but it was probably not just true cost, but also incentive. Right.
Okay, buy that. As long as that's legal.
All right, Jennifer?
Yeah, so what about bus riding? Because we're already getting passes, so it doesn't seem appropriate to be paid to ride a bus we're already getting for free. Is that kind of implied that you don't get to count bus travel, or do we need to?
Because you're provided a free bus pass, you can explicitly say excluding buses for which you have a bus pass.
I have a thought here, if someone wants to consider it, would be active transportation, which is how we usually describe biking and walking as opposed to alternative, and
Okay.
solve that.
Is that okay with the
I
maker
accept it.
and the friendly?
Yeah.
Or in the second? Sorry.
Not the friendly, though.
No, I know, I'm sorry, I meant and the second.
Yeah,
It-
Mike.
But it's not okay with the guy who made the friendly amendment. The thing I would suggest, though, too, is you're leaving out a couple of different modes there. Although I agree with what you're trying to do, and I agree that almost covers it. But electric scooters, there may at some point in the near future be other means that aren't active but are alternative modes. Thus, how about the language that says reimbursement for alternative modes that are not otherwise reimbursed in any way, which we are
The buses?
for our bus pass,
And, yeah.
or which are not otherwise subsidized or reimbursed.
Does
That
that
covers
seem
your concern
like it covers it?
and leaves
You
all
can,
options.
is everybody,
You could just exclude bus.
or we could,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a couple
Just
ways to do
exclude
that.
bus.
Since you are receive bus passes, we could just explicitly exclude buses. Except,
I would think that's appropriate.
okay. Everybody good with that?
I liked what you were doing.
Greg.
That was good.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of want to get some clarity on this in terms of, what the rate per mile. So, are we tying it to the federal rate for, automotive transportation, or what's the basis for, pulling 26 cents out of there? Is it something we pulled out of the sky?
Yeah,
And
we
do
have
we-
an
and
answer
do we
coming
have
to
a-
you.
Yeah, I think the answer is.
We have an answer
striding
being
forward.
delivered right now.
Comes to the table.
And do we have a cost of living deal built into that?
Adjusted with.
So for reimbursements, the city follows guidelines provided by the IRS, and they fluctuate from year to year. It's that we just tie to the IRS.
So the IRS has no standard for bike mileage, right?
They provide a mileage reimbursement rate not specific to
To
mode of transportation.
Okay. All right, you've had all your questions answered?
No,
Yeah.
explanation, I asked about this quite a while ago because I've been walking for years, and Sarita said that it had not been adjusted every year like the automobile rate, so that's why it seems large, because it's doing a lot of catch-up.
Okay. Okay, are we ready? Do we need to read it one more time just to be clear we're all good? Okay. All right, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and none opposed, so that passes. Okay, fifth one.
Oh, I'm
That's you.
not used to this yet. Move to update section 10.04 spouse/guest expenses to replace all references to spouse with partner.
Second.
Any questions, discussion about this? Betty?
If it has to do with expenses, what kind of expenses does the city pay the spouse for currently?
Meals?
Yeah, this is just a replacement of the word that is referenced in.
I know, but I mean,
There are a number of events where, I don't have that in front of me, but
I wondered if should say companion instead of partner. If it's about reimbursement, if someone needs to take someone with them.
So currently, the provision we're talking about, the expenses, it says, "City shall reimburse counselors or the mayor for spouse expenses at local events when the counselor or mayor and spouse are jointly invited, and the counselors are serving in their official capacities, such as a recognition dinner." And then it goes on for a long time, I won't read it, but, so that's what we're talking about. It would replace spouse with partner in that situation.
I understand that part, but I don't think counselors ever get reimbursed for taking someone to a dinner, do they? I know the mayor does. Or the mayor's spouse has.
I think the rule is the
can't think
same for I think
yeah, I
if,
can't think of a specific example, but I have always assumed that that was the case, that
So part of the specifics here is that it says, mayor for spouse expenses, counselors or mayor for spouse events at local, when the counselor or the mayor and spouses are jointly invited. So what you have there is often you receive invitations to attend in your official capacities as city councilors, and the invitation is extended to you just as you as the city councilor, and it's not extended to both you and your spouse, or if you changed it, you and your partner. So in that case, the only would be paid for would be the you, and your spouse wouldn't be reimbursed, or your partner wouldn't be reimbursed, because they weren't explicitly invited. And so that's the distinction that we often see.
I prefer sidekick.
Companion can shoot a dog, though, you know.
Well, because it could.
we ain't gonna bring your dog.
Over on this one, man.
No, I'm,
Sophie loves Satcher Shadow Bruno.
No, wait a second. I think we still got Betty is on. I've got Greg next, and then Emily, and then Mike. Do you need to weigh in on this too?
I'm still talking, I think.
I know. I just had a.
I approve of the change. It's just that I'm saying, if you're reimbursing someone who is single, maybe they should be able to take somebody that's not a spouse or a partner. I don't think there are any cases where we do reimburse, but if the invitation said to you and guest.
So the reason why it is in here is because it would be an ethics violation for the city of Eugene if you are invited and we can pay for you to attend something if it's in your official capacity and you're being invited in your official capacity, because it is part of your services. If you wanted to bring your spouse, we couldn't pay for your spouse unless it was very explicitly allowed for in your operating agreement, and that's an exception under the government ethics rules. So the reason why it's so clear, because we can't, but for your situation as a city councilor, you wouldn't be receiving the reimbursement for your spouse. And ethics rules covers you and spouses and relatives. Just a guest, which would be, somebody that's not related to you. Now, you can have a policy that you want to reimburse it. It wouldn't be an ethics issue. So some of the reasons why this stuff is so clearly laid out is to make sure that when people are reimbursed, it is compliant with ethics law.
Okay, I'm just thinking lots of things aren't fair to single people,
Turn to.
to unattached people.
You can say, what I would recommend, if you want to add spouse or guest, or partner or guest, or however you want to do it, just make it really clear. You can have as your operating agreement, add guest. That is 100% within your capacities to add that to your operating agreements. I'm just saying the reason why it's not in here is it wouldn't be an ethical obligation for it to currently be happening. So that's very likely why it was written this way back in the day. But 100% within your authority to say, we want our operating agreement to say that.
Make a move.
Okay, I'm bringing up something that's irrelevant right now, but I just think that, I know there is a lot of discrimination against single people. And a friend and I once argued this at an event where they said your spouse could come in for half price, or maybe it was free even, and we went together and we said, why should we have to pay? We came together and they gave in at that point, but that was an event a long time ago. So anyway, I'll vote for this.
All right, Greg.
I'm
Nope.
good.
All right, Emily.
I just guess the same thing, that without a definition of partner, I mean, I get where it's coming from, but I don't have a partner at the moment, so how do you define it? So I think it would be more appropriate to say guest.
Perhaps we could
I
do
move to friendly amend to guest.
perhaps we could try to capture all of it and say spouse, partner, or guest.
There you go.
Just cover all the bases.
I accept that.
Okay,
If they're invited.
if they're invited.
They're still going to have to be invited. I mean, so that's part of the
right,
issue. So what you currently have in there, so it would need to say counselor, Semple,
Invited
and
spouse,
guest.
partner, guest.
Right, that's the way it's currently
Invited, 'cause-
invited.
Yeah,
Right.
that's the critical.
Because we didn't have that in there.
Well,
So can I move to have a friendly?
It says jointly invited currently, so right now you're amending, it's a little bit of a disadvantage because it's not
Well,
showing
it
as
doesn't
red.
say it on my
Say it.
motion.
It says the city, because you're amending this was written
amending the
to
word.
amend only one word, you weren't able to see what the context of it. It says the city shall reimburse counselors or the mayor for spouse expenses at local events when the counselor or mayor and spouses are jointly invited and the counselors are serving in their official capacity.
So
what-
this would just, instead of spouse there, it would put this list, and it's already saying they need to be invited.
And for what I'll recommend is when you see the resolution that would be adopting this, you will see it in two forms. One will be red line, so you can see the changes. And that was actually included at the prior process session. You just didn't get to it at the time. So when this comes back in front of you, you'll have a red line version and you'll have a clean version. And so you'll be able to see exactly what changed.
Okay, Mike, did you need one more comment?
I didn't make any on this yet, so.
I know, I just, yeah.
I think identity politics is dangerous and dumb, and I would have voted against it until we just opened it up widely to all manner of options, in which case I'll vote for it now. But I had a whole diatribe set. That's why I put my arm up. So now we've solved that.
Okay. All right, are we ready to vote now? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, none opposed, so that passes as well. Thank you all very much. We are adjourned.